Castle of Good Hope, Cape Town, a journey through time. Cape Town. A city where the Atlantic waves kiss the shore and where Table Mountain casts its majestic shadow over centuries of history. Nestled near the bustling harbor, among modern roads and office buildings, stands South Africa's oldest surviving colonial building, the Castle of Good Hope. Hi everyone, and welcome to this in-depth journey through time. I'm Yasser, and for the next few minutes, we're going to dive into the story of the Castle of Good Hope in Cape Town. A story filled with exploration, conquest, struggle, survival, and heritage. The strategic birth of a fortress. Let's rewind the clock to the mid-1600s. The Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC, was ruling the waves. On their way to the riches of the East, they needed a refreshment station, a halfway point between Europe and Asia. And where better than the Cape? Before the castle existed, there was just a basic fort made of mud, timber, and straw, called the Fort de Good Hoop. But harsh storms, rotting materials, and constant tension with the local Khoikhoi people made it clear they needed something stronger. In 1666, construction began on the stone fortress we now call the Castle of Good Hope. Over 13 years, using local labor, enslaved people, and European engineers, a five-pointed star-shaped bastion rose from the soil. The Dutch East India Company's stronghold. This place wasn't just military, it was administrative, economic, and symbolic. The castle served as the VOC's headquarters. Inside these thick yellow walls were offices, cells, storerooms, and even a chapel. Imagine it. Dutch officers in stiff uniforms, writing letters by candlelight. African and Asian slaves hauling buckets of food. Local indigenous leaders arriving for tense negotiations. And let's not forget the architecture. Influenced by European military designs, it was built to last. And last it did. Over 350 years later, it still stands. Life within the castle walls. Now, let's talk about life inside. This bell tower? It rang to call soldiers to duty or to warn of attack. The dungeon? Cold, dark, and terrifying. And yes, people were imprisoned here for crimes, rebellion, even witchcraft. The governor had luxurious quarters, with furniture shipped from Europe. Meanwhile, enslaved laborers slept in crowded, rough quarters. Life was very different depending on who you were. The castle became a microcosm of Cape society, divided by class, race, and power. But it was also where stories of resistance, love, betrayal, and change played out every day. British occupation and 19th century transformation. By the late 1700s, the global balance of power was shifting. Britain and France were locked in fierce battles for empire. The Cape, a crucial maritime stop, was about to change hands. British takeover and strategic importance. In 1795, British forces seized the Cape from the Dutch to prevent it from falling into French hands. This marked the first British occupation. Though the Dutch briefly regained control in 1803, the British returned for good in 1806. With that, the Castle of Good Hope became the seat of British military and administrative power in southern Africa. While its design remained, its role began to evolve. The British added their own touches, like the iconic guardhouse, and new interior refurbishments. They used the castle more as a military barracks and command center than a trading post. Picture rows of British troops drilling in the courtyard. Officers drawing up colonial plans in candlelit rooms. The once Dutch stronghold was now part of the British Empire. The castle in the 1800s, war, punishment, and policy. But alongside military operations, the castle served a more sinister purpose. Many cells here were used to hold prisoners, both common criminals and political dissenters. Colonial rule wasn't just about red coats and flags, it was about control. Indigenous leaders, local rebels, and people opposing British policies were often held here. Throughout the 1800s, the castle sat at the center of colonial planning. Its proximity to the growing harbor made it a nerve center for logistics, taxation, and troop movement. It was also a symbol. A warning. A reminder to the people of the Cape, both colonists and the colonized, that this was where power lived. Cultural impact and life under British rule. The British brought with them not only guns and soldiers but their own culture. Food, language, fashion, all began to shift. The castle's kitchen was cooking British-style dishes. English became more dominant in the colony. By the mid-1800s, the castle was also a place of ceremony. Royal visits, military parades, and colonial celebrations happened right here, within these walls. But let's not forget, the British Empire also upheld slavery, racial segregation, and economic exploitation. Though slavery was abolished in the 1830s, indentured labor and inequality continued. The castle witnessed all of it. From high-level decisions to everyday lives, it was the beating heart of British power in the Cape. 20th century changes, from military fort to national landmark. As the 20th century dawned, the Castle of Good Hope stood quietly, weathering the winds of political change. The world around it was evolving, rapidly. Empires were fading. New nations were rising. And South Africa was entering one of the most turbulent chapters in its history. The decline of military use. By the early 1900s, the castle's military importance was fading. Newer, more modern military bases were built outside Cape Town. The castle, once the epicenter of colonial command, was being left behind. During the Anglo-Boer War, the castle served as a headquarters and military prison, but not the kind of strategic fortress it had been for centuries. Times had changed. Guns, aircraft, and new warfare methods were rendering old stone forts obsolete. Bit by bit, the castle's role shifted. It became more symbolic than strategic. A relic of empire in a rapidly modernizing city. Cultural relevance and early preservation efforts. But even as its military relevance declined, public awareness of its historical value began to grow. In the 1930s, preservationists started lobbying for the castle's protection. Historians, architects, and cultural advocates saw it not as a ruin, but as a living archive. Restoration projects began. Walls were reinforced. Roofs were repaired. Paintings were uncovered. Suddenly, the castle wasn't just a government building, it was becoming a museum of memory. And all the while, the city around it exploded with growth. Skyscrapers rose. Roads were laid. Yet the castle stayed still, anchored to the past, surrounded by the future. The castle during apartheid. But the castle also remained a silent witness to the most painful era of South African history, apartheid. From 1948 onward, apartheid policies segregated South African society. While the castle no longer functioned as a primary military installation, it was still under state control. It remained a symbol of authority and, for many, oppression. Black South Africans were barred from full citizenship. Entire communities were displaced. And yet, within the castle's walls, some began preserving fragments of indigenous, Islamic, and Cape Malay history, quiet acts of resistance through culture. Even the castle's chapel, once used to baptize European children, became a space of contradiction. Faith, heritage, and power mingled under its vaulted ceiling. Artifacts from this time reveal a people determined to hold on to identity in the face of brutal discrimination. The castle's stone halls absorbed it all, stories that would not be silenced. Post-apartheid era, transformation into a heritage site. When South Africa's apartheid regime finally collapsed in the early 1990s, a new dawn broke over the nation. It was a time for reconciliation, remembrance, and redefinition. And in the heart of Cape Town, the Castle of Good Hope was about to step into a new role. The castle's new identity. After centuries of war, occupation, and oppression, the castle now had a chance to become something different. No longer a fortress. No longer a symbol of colonial dominance. but something more inclusive, something that reflected the country's diverse heritage. In the mid-1990s, under the leadership of Nelson Mandela, South Africa took bold steps to heal deep divisions. National monuments were re-examined, and the castle, one of the oldest, was reimagined. It became a place not just to remember the Dutch or the British, but to honor all who shaped this land: Khoisan, Xhosa, Malay, African, Indian, European, and more. Symbol of reconciliation. These walls have held pain. The dungeon, for example, once held political prisoners and those resisting colonial rule. Now, it stands open as a space of reflection. In 1998, Mandela himself presided over a ceremony here, unveiling plaques dedicated to those who suffered under colonial and apartheid rule. He spoke of the importance of remembering the full truth of our history, not just the sanitized parts. Since then, the castle has hosted reconciliation events, traditional rituals, and multicultural festivals. Painful memories are not erased, but embraced, understood, and integrated. These exhibits tell stories previously erased. They give voice to the voiceless. Stories of the enslaved, the dispossessed, and the forgotten. Restoration, education, and tourism. Restoration has been ongoing. Not just the physical structure, but also its story. Over $100 million was invested in a multi-year revitalization project to bring the castle up to global heritage standards. Today, the castle is a top educational destination. Students from across the country come here to learn about colonialism, indigenous history, slavery, resistance movements, and nation building. And tourists? They come for the architecture, the history, and the authenticity. But they leave with something more, an understanding of how this country's past still lives in its present. Room-by-room tour, secrets, stories, and symbolism inside the castle. Castle Courtyard. First, we step inside the Castle of Good Hope, a journey through rooms filled with secrets, power, and symbolism. Governor's Quarters. This was the seat of authority, where orders were issued and history written. The colonial coat of arms still looms above the fireplace, a reminder of power and control. Lady and Barnard Ballroom. Elegant and vibrant, this room once hosted Cape Town's grandest events. But beneath the glamour, colonial tensions simmered. Lady Anne's journals offer rare insights into life behind the scenes. Cold, dark, and silent. Here, prisoners awaited uncertain fates. The walls still bear the marks, etched names and messages lost in time. Military room. Filled with weapons, uniforms, and maps, this room was the castle's strategic heart. Every object speaks of preparation, defense, and survival. Chapel. A quiet place of worship, weddings, and reflection. The chapel shows a softer side of life inside these walls, faith amidst fear. Cat Balcony. From this balcony, laws were proclaimed and justice carried out. It was a platform for power, and sometimes, punishment. Map Room. A small space with massive meaning. Here, early maps claimed the Cape for Europe, drawing borders that changed lives forever. Each room reveals a layer of South Africa's colonial legacy, of decisions, dreams, and deep scars. These walls have witnessed it all. Thanks for joining this chapter of our journey. If you've enjoyed exploring history room by room, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next part, where we reveal how the castle transformed into a museum and symbol of cultural rebirth. See you in the next one.